Hi, it's Andy from PCR Global with another one of our risk management walk and talk videos. Today's I'm going to talk about communication and namely sort of risk communication. So before we go, quick check. Some people walking behind us, hopefully won't run me over. So risk communication. People talk about communication and then risk communication. If you Google risk communication, it'll basically give you an idea of currently what's going on with it in the UK government. So risk communication, if you Google it, it's like from governments to large organisations, basically giving information to us as the lay person on the ground, so warning us of any sort of health risks. So risk communication right at the top. If we bring it down lower into organisations, communications, risk communications, it's good that it's now in the high level structure of the ISO standard. So it's in there under clause 7.4. So communication has made it into there. 9001, how we communicating with stakeholders about our quality. 45,001, safety. 14,001, environmental areas. It talks about external communication and internal communication. On the risk management ISO 31,000, it's in there. I think it's not, because that hasn't got the high level structure. That's 6.2, where it talks about communication and consultation. It puts the two words together. Vitally important, if you can picture the risk management process within ISO 31,000, you will see it at the top. You've got the blue bar, you've got your scope, you've got your criteria, then and the context. Then underneath that, you've got your risk assessment process, made up of three areas: risk identification, risk analysis, and then risk evaluation. Those three areas sit in the risk assessment part. Then underneath that, you've got your risk treatment, risk reporting, and recording. But on the left-hand side of that risk management process, you have the communication and consultation part. Obviously, if you're identifying risks and hazards, you've got to communicate them. Now, communication itself, yes, you can put it on notice boards, but consultation, completely different. This is where you're actually involving people in it. So it is quite good. The ISO 18788 for security, that takes it to a step further in there, because it breaks it down into operational communication and risk communication. When it talks about operational communication, it really is targeted then on the procedures, the communication sort of plan, communication between the security teams, communication with all stakeholders. It really does sort of take it into a little bit deeper area. It talks about the requirement to identify the need to communicate risks with sort of military or civil authorities if need be. Also talks about communicating the medical plan, being able to communicate medical emergencies. So the risk communication in ISO 18788, it takes it into a little bit more depth within there. As part of the risk comms, as opposed to the operational comms that we just talked about, it also mentions complaints and grievances, very important. It also mentions communicating with the media and also your whistleblowing policy. Yeah, and 1878, incidentally, that should be on the website. So what else? Just sort of off cuff, that's quite formalised. When you hear people say upward and downward communication, what do they sort of mean by upward and downward communication? Well, that's about downward communication. Yeah, you've got your organisation putting out its policies, putting out its procedures, putting out its you musts, and then you've got the lack of potentially upward communication, which is from the ground, the guys on the ground. We need the guys on the ground to communicate. They know what's going on. We know Yoshida's iceberg of ignorance, and I often talk about strategic, tactical and operational level and the line of sight. So we need that communication to come up. So upwards and downwards communication. What else? Crisis communications, different area again. Some people are often very good at communicating when all around them is going calm, but communicating in a crisis is is often very different because you have to stay calm. It's a new level of communications required, remembering that a crisis is a sort of an haphazard, unknown, not always unknown, but it's an event that's basically challenged the core assumptions of the organisation. Yeah, it's an unstable event that threatens the strategic objectives of the organisation. 5 minutes. A couple of quotes. George Bernard Shaw, famous playwright, I think he says, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. That's quite apt nowadays with the sort of email era. You send an email, you think you've communicated. You haven't communicated, you've basically sent an email. Communication is when that information, that data is received, processed correctly, and then responding to. So that communication area, it's quite a loop. Well, we've come to a bit of a dead end, so we can't go down there. What else? If we talk about incidents and accidents, so the Zeebrugge ferry disaster, 1987, 86, 87, about 190 odd people died in there. An absolute failure of communication when the boatswain failed to shut the bow doors on the Townsend-Torresen ferry, resulting in all those deaths. Absolutely horrendous. Worth looking at. And worth looking at right at the start of that, the fingers obviously pointed at the individual, so a person approach, whereas it was the organisation's actual approach to communications of hazard and risks was really left wanting. Nobody got prosecuted for that, but it was one of the cases that led to PIDA, so the Public Interest Disclosure Act, basically the whistleblowing act, some people call it. So communications, risk communications, crisis communications, absolutely critical, and I think a lot of companies don't treat it with the requirement it deserves. We've got to get the information from the ground up well over the time. Such an interesting area we've got to focus on. Have a look at your communications plan. Maybe it's not even written down, but have a look at it, because most times when it goes wrong, it's down to comms. So thank you very much for watching. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, stay productive, but always don't trust it, test it. Thanks for watching.